Morning and welcome to the May planning meeting. I have a short note to read out for hybrid meetings, if you'll excuse me. So councillors and officers are reminded to put their mobile phones or electronic devices on silent if they have one near them. Those present in the room should face forward, speak directly into the microphone and not place papers or electronic devices between themselves or their microphones. Please would remote participants mute microphones when not speaking, as this will reduce feedback and background noise and save bandwidth to prevent any loss of connection. Members of the council joining us remotely should leave their cameras on, and officers leave cameras on only for the agenda item that you're speaking to. Members of the public registered to speak for or against an application and parish and town council representatives will be called to speak after the officers have presented the application. Members of the public will be asked to leave the meeting once their item has been completed. That's just for those on Teams. After each item has been presented, I'll invite members present in the room to ask questions first. Those members joining us remotely will be then invited to speak, and they should indicate this by using the raise hand facility. Only those members of the planning committee present in the room will be making the decision, and I will confirm the result verbally for the benefit of those watching the webcast. Be aware that there can be a 5-second delay for those speaking remotely. So on that basis, we'll commence with item 1, which is asking you to give me authority to sign 2 sets of minutes. One is the minutes which record the appointment of the chair and the vice chair, and the second is the minutes for the meeting of the 16th of May. Thank you very much. Good. Julie, do we have any apologies for absence and substitutes today?
So we have apologies from Councillor Byrne. Councillor John Barnes is attending remotely as the substitute for the Conservative vacancy that we currently have on the committee.
Thank you very much. No additional items today, and I don't believe we have any withdrawn applications. Do we have any disclosures of interest? No disclosures. If it occurs to you during the meeting, raise it before the item. Item 6 is just a list of applications for today, and that promptly moves us on to the first application, which is RR 2020/2132/P, 29 Seabourn Road, Bexhill, and this is going to be presented remotely by Edwin Cork. Edward, can you come in?
Hi, good morning. Yes. Can you hear me okay?
We can, whenever you're ready.
Good. Okay. The proposal is a resubmission of a previously approved scheme.
Edwin, just bear with us 1 minute while Sarah gets the presentation up on screen.
Okay, sorry.
That's okay. Okay.
Okay. Yeah, the proposal is a resubmission of a previously approved scheme for replacement of a bungalow and detached garage with a terrace of 3 houses. The application was reported to the February Planning Committee with an officer recommendation to grant planning permission subject to conditions. Members raised particular concern about the impact of the development on badgers and the potential impacts of them being displaced into and excavating under neighbouring properties. Members resolved to defer a decision for further information regarding the potential relocation of protected species and impact on neighbouring properties. Natural England has subsequently confirmed that it is highly unlikely they would licence the trapping and translocation of badgers outside their social group territory due to disease risk implications. This has been acknowledged by the applicant's new ecological consultant, who has undertaken a re-evaluation of the information submitted to date and has proposed an alternative mitigation strategy. The alternative badger and reptile mitigation strategy proposes the creation of an artificial set on the site, located to the east of the existing main set, followed by the permanent closure of the main and annex sets, and the establishment of underground barriers to prevent badgers tunnelling into neighbouring properties. I also understand that the applicant has now agreed to erect above-ground barriers to the east and west boundaries of the site, following a site meeting with neighbours. Further to this, a 5 metre wide badger biodiversity habitat area would be created across the northern part of the site, together with a foraging pathway along the western boundary of the site. These will be secured by condition. The county ecologist accepts that the alternative mitigation strategy would be the best option to retain badgers on site and to address the concerns raised about them being displaced into and excavating under neighbouring properties. A badger mitigation licence would be required from Natural England to execute the works, but it should be noted that Natural England will not consider a mitigation licence application until planning permission has been granted for the proposal. Turning to the site's existing reptile population, the county ecologist has advised that the construction of an artificial set would impact all remaining reptile habitat on site, and as such, an off-site receptor site for the existing reptile population would need to be secured. A Section 106 legal agreement would be required to secure this off-site receptor site. In summary, subject to the legal agreement and appropriate conditions, including one requiring proof that a badger mitigation licence has been issued by Natural England, the recommendation is to grant planning permission for the proposal, as it is a sustainable residential development which will have an acceptable impact on the environment and will make a positive contribution to the district's housing supply. That's it.
Thank you, Edward. We have two speakers against the application. I'll call the first one forward. Catherine Allen. Catherine, please come forward. No, that's okay. Yeah, it's okay. So, Catherine, you spoke before, so you know the process, hopefully, and after you speak, members will have an opportunity to ask you questions, although I would remind members to avoid asking Catherine technical questions. She's here as a neighbour. So whenever you're ready, please.
Good morning, councillors. To remind you all, I am Catherine Allen of 2 Bishops Walk and own the western boundary to the proposed development. In February, the case was deferred to find out more detail of the effects on animal welfare and the potential impact on the neighbours and their properties. At the developer's request, I was invited to meet the 5th ecologists, Dan Bennett and Rebecca Mortensen, from the Ecology Co-op, not the previous ecologist, Mark Vivian. At the time, I pointed out some of my concerns: increase in badger tunnels, a new tunnel to the annex set right on my boundary. Mr. Bennett explained that a camera was needed to explore direction and extent of tunnel, and if it was heading towards my foundation. Mr. Christie agreed. It was also stated that trail cameras were needed to be set up to assess where the badgers were travelling around my garage and workshop. This has not yet happened, so the ecologist has no idea where the animals are going or damage to my land, potential risk of collapse of tunnels. There are now 3 tunnels heading under my boundary with no idea where they terminate. There have been a number of text messages on my phone from Cara Christie, developer, asking me what my thoughts are regarding the above and possible badger proofing. I have asked 3 times, the last being on the 13th of May, to have a written copy of what exactly Dan Bennett was proposing before I could make an informed decision. I was told by Cara Christie I would receive this in time to comment to the council here today. Nothing has been forwarded to me as of yet. What assurances will the neighbours get in writing for any damage or adverse consequences to neighbouring buildings and gardens as a result of building work? And will it be rectified or appropriately compensated? What is the potential long-term consequences of development on neighbouring property and gardens, e.g. subsidence, flooding? Will it be rectified appropriately and to what time frame? I'm not assured by anything I've heard in relation to my concerns being raised. Councillor Brewington at the last meeting asked the council, have you a pot of money if planning is granted for the neighbours' redress? Or will it be me taking the Robert District Council to court? Regarding animal welfare, on the 25th of April 21, the Rural Sussex Crime Team wrote to me stating, and I quote, the site management has said they have no intention of disturbing or destroying the badger sets. I have previously stated what actions the developer has taken in regards to animal welfare and the reptile habitat. Advanced ground radar technology could not establish evidence to provide for the mitigation plan. How has the ecologist then assessed the extent of the tunnels underground, the size of the set, and the number of badgers? Last week, whilst in the garden, I witnessed 7 badgers around the main set, 4 of which were babies. Obviously, this is unlikely to be the full amount of badgers that are there. In considering making an informed decision today, please consider Natural England's report states there is insufficient space for an artificial set and proximity to the original set is too close. Have councillors this time all been given an unredacted copy of the ecologist's co-op's mitigation plan? How are the badgers to survive, both the main and annex set being destroyed? Being confined to a small space of which the majority will be tree roots on the north-eastern boundary. How will reptiles remain safe, translocated to a children's recreation ground? How has all the risk been assessed, and longer-term risks to the badgers, the foxes, the slow worms and birds?
Would I ask you to finish up now?
I would much rather now that a beautiful like-for-like bungalow be built, knowing the badgers are safe and the gardens can be well maintained, being a self-build. This has caused me a lot of stress. As previously stated, I would like some resolve to suit myself, wildlife and developers. The proposed development will provide none of this. It seems more about quantity than quality. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have a question for Catherine Allen? Yes, Councillor Ganley.
Thank you. And thank you for your presentation again. I'm a little puzzled, though. At the moment, you have 3 badger runs under your ground.
Well, I believe there's 2 tunnels down the bottom, but in March of this year, there was a storm in which the main bungalow, part of it, collapsed onto the western boundary just before my fence. The whole wildlife corridor was covered in glass. It took 8 weeks for that glass to be removed. There still, if the councillors, I know you came to the site to have a look, all the western corridor is covered in bricks. So I believe that 3rd tunnel in the annex set is a result of that building tumbling down. The other tunnels were not there before the work was done, and I believe my colleague was giving some evidence of that.
Yes. The fact is, though, that you have quite a few badgers under your grounds at the moment.
Well, we don't know that, do we? Because it's not been... we know they come into my ground. We don't know where they are. It was stated that cameras would need to be put up to know where they were going, but obviously I haven't heard anything about that as yet.
Right. It simply seems to me that the proposals in this application of installing badger, what's it called? Underground fencing, if anything, would reduce the number of badgers coming onto your land than otherwise.
Well, hopefully it would, but then you've also got the concern of the existing tunnels. Would they be how would they be filled in? Would they be filled in with concrete? I've got no idea. Nothing's come back to me, like I said.
Right.
If I could sort of intervene, I mean, that's the issue for Natural England. I think that's the point, and I can assure you that the committee has had the full reports that you refer to on done by the ecologists. They're not, unfortunately, available to the public because we're not allowed to make them public by law.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Any other questions? Your microphone's on. Any other questions? Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
I appreciate you coming in today. We have Marion Crawley. Once again, I think you know the process, so thank you very much.
Good morning to you all. You might remember me. I felt you appreciated our input last time. The most common word at the meeting was overdevelopment, and that survival of the badgers was unlikely. The deferral was to obtain further information on the impact on my property, so I hope to be told what that impact will be. And it was also to see if the badgers could be moved. We now know that only happens rarely and not for self-build small development classes of application, which this is. Rother Council's self-build register shows only 4% want a terraced house. In 2014, the site was much greener. The original building and generous land around it afforded privacy. Why is the height of the roof now allowed to be higher than the restriction applied in 2014 grant of planning? I noticed this alteration and it made me wonder what changes I hadn't noticed. In 2014, my kitchen extension wasn't there. This has been completely ignored, yet is a habitable room and should be more than 22 metres from the new build. The three immediate neighbours met the Ecology Co-op on the 25th of April. Dan showed us the small area identified for the artificial set. I said it's within the canopy of and very close to the roots of the silver birch trees, which it would impact. He admitted that was a very good point. It seemed a major problem, but isn't addressed. Both Natural England and the county ecologist agreed there's insufficient space for an artificial set, yet Ecology Co-op are forging ahead with the idea. The ecologist also admitted he's never built one in a garden before. It's a first for him, but he likes a challenge. The existing set hasn't been plotted, yet the artificial set has to replicate its size. How can that be done? Dan says he'll abide by best practice. That guidance says that regardless of the artificial set size, a minimum area of 30 metres radius from the outlying holes should be demarcated. It further says that small artificial sets generally tend not to work. The county ecologist now believes there is sufficient space for it. The site parameters haven't changed, the proposed build size hasn't changed, Natural England's view hasn't changed. So what has changed that's made her change her mind? Surface water is still unresolved, groundwater monitoring not even mentioned. This is alleged to be resolved as one of the 19 conditions attached if approved. 19 separate conditions, which don't include the 10% net biodiversity gain, because I'm told it's not actually law yet, but has been made a condition to another approval just last month, reference 168p. Why is it not applied here when surely it's more crucial? Biodiversity has been a key factor here. I still have questions over the grant of previous applications. 2014 conditions were not met, which the note states voids planning permission, yet it's still quoted as valid. 2017 application had no survey at all and very little information, yet was dealt with as a renewal. Rubber stamped was the term used, which you're encouraged to do now. This application was submitted as a self-build, with inaccurate information in the design statement. 8 years have passed since planning permission was granted, and all that's happened there is habitat destruction, most of which should have been licensed by Natural England. The county ecologist expects Natural England to prevent development. In truth, the development is far too big for the site. A compromise for all would be refusal on the basis of common sense. So many changes have taken place since the original grant of permission: climate change, environment legislation, public perceptions, buildings around the site, sets, sizes and numbers of both badgers and sets. 14 holes now, there were only 6 back then, and no annex set at all. No tunnels extended beyond the site till the strimming in 2020. And of course, back then there was bat roost potentials and no reptiles. Services and parking were adequate for the one bungalow. How will the drain, which goes to my property, cope with a 200% capacity increase? And will that extra water impact me too? As I asked before, what is my redress when it all goes wrong? The council must hold responsibility and hopefully a pot of compensation money. That will reassure me. In summary, I'm keen to have the land developed. It's been in a state for way too long, but this should not be detrimental to the living conditions of the neighbours nor the wildlife. The sensible approach is to preserve both by refusing this application and encouraging a much smaller, more in-keeping development, a one single-storey dwelling. This would complement and fit in rather than detract from the surrounding buildings, ensure local infrastructure can cope, preserve privacy and the peace and enjoyment of property which is entitled to neighbours, suit the wildlife, plus give the new occupants better living standards too. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Do we have any questions for Marion Crawley? Any questions? No. Thank you very much. We very much appreciate. Could you just push the speaker? Thank you. We very much appreciate your coming in again today. And we do have a speaker for the applicant. That's Cara Christie. Thank you very much. If you could come forward. Good.
Good morning, members of the committee. As you will be aware, this is an application that has returned to the committee from that in February, which was deferred for the reason relating to that of the badger mitigation scheme. And since that time, we have employed a new ecologist and have been working with the county ecologist, Kate Cole, Natural England, and have also had direct discussions with the neighbouring residents. This has culminated in a cohesive mitigation plan which involves a new artificial set being created through the licensing process with Natural England. This has been set out by the planning officer in his report and is secured and delivered through a number of conditions on the planning consent. Further to this meeting, Catherine Allen at 2 Bishop's Close had some concerns regarding overground badger mitigation, and we have agreed to fund and provide additional badger-proofing measures along the boundary between the two properties as part of our development proposals. This will be fully funded and installed by ourselves and will prevent direct access by badgers from the active main set from entering the garden of her property from the application site. Dan has drafted the letter and I have chased him to send it to Catherine, and it should be on its way today. We as applicants are more than happy to accept these conditions, and should permission be granted, we will continue to work with the relevant authorities to ensure this is delivered successfully as an integral part of the development. The previous committee meeting did not highlight any other issues relating to the application, and the application can simply be seen as a resubmission of an earlier approved scheme. Indeed, the plans are identical to that which was approved in early 2018 and which was approved under the very same core strategy policies that are still used for decision making. In fact, it will provide a betterment to this permission on account of compliance with the newer DASA policies, including matters such as the provision of electric charging points, accessibility standards, and other environmental matters which are also secured by condition. Furthermore, in light of the current need for housing in the district, the delivery of 3 homes can be given significant weight in the overall balance. As it stands, the derelict building is causing issues, as mentioned by Catherine herself. Additionally, we have begun conversations with landowners in the Coombe Valley Countryside Park in regards to off-site reptile receptor sites, and this has been received by Murray Davidson, the Environment and Natural Resources Manager, very positively. In summary, the development can be considered positively on account of being held acceptable in very recent times under current policies and having agreed upon an appropriate mitigation plan, which in any case needs to be submitted and agreed prior to work starting, with the appropriate licence being in place. The application addresses the need for housing and will appropriately redevelop this existing residential site whilst providing robust safeguards for wildlife and neighbouring properties. I therefore hope that the committee can support the new development.
Thank you very much. Do you have any questions for Cara Christie? Any questions? Thank you. We really very much appreciate you coming in and speaking this morning. We now have the two ward members. When I say we have the two ward members, we have Councillor Clark, who's going to speak. Councillor Bruton did contact me yesterday. She can't come because she has some fairly serious family issues to deal with, but did ask me to say that she was not supportive of the proposal. But I will let Councillor Clark speak on that matter.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I'd just like to reiterate, Councillor Bruton would have been here. It's just he's got serious family issues to deal with, which I wish the best with. Some of the points I'm going to make, I made before, but I need to reiterate. I still have an issue of how planning permission was granted in the first place, when it was known that badger sets were on the site. There are even more badger sets now. They are a protected species and should have been left in peace by allowing only a single dwelling. I despair how many times we can allow developers to come back, get 3 years planning permission, don't develop the site, and then come back later and ask for another 3 years planning permission, and don't even tidy up the site over the years. I spent many attempts with our planning enforcement department trying to get this site tidied up over the years. And although planning enforcement notice was given, nothing was done. The houses will not help local housing need, as the prices will be well above what locals can afford. They're not shared ownership or social housing. Containing the baggers will not reduce the stress. I used to work in the building trade. This will be called to the badgers during the building work. Heavy machinery, noise, digging footings will totally distress them, and containment to me is almost like entrapment of their freedom. I have tremendous admiration for the residents who have so well presented their case for objections to this application. I believe a lot has changed since the original planning permission was given. If there are grounds for refusal, it should be that we can't really be sure we can protect the badgers by developing the site, and it would be totally against the wishes of a large number of local residents we represent. I don't believe we should give planning permission because of a poor decision made by the previous committee. 3 dwellings on the site is too many. A single dwelling replacing the original home would have been a much better solution and would have been much easier way of protecting the badgers. The developer has proposed 3 dwellings on the site, obviously to maximise the profit on their investment, which is fair enough, but that totally disregards the effect of having badgers. There is increased parking on the site. If this was turned down and went to appeal, it would be very interesting to know what the government planning inspector would think about this application. There are, as I said, massive objections from the residents, but it is in your hands. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Clark. So, I'm just going to open the floor up to questions or comments. I think it's really important to remember that we're here because we deferred it in relation to the issue of dealing with the badgers, not the basic principle of whether there is development on the site, because there is already a permission there. And I think going back on that discussion would be it would be irrelevant in terms of this discussion today. Councillor Ganley.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 7, under paragraph 4.4, history, application RR 2021/1234, it states that this is an alternative proposal to RR 2020/2132, not yet determined. So if it's not yet determined, presumably it's still extant. And yet there's no mention of it in the list of the history, and I wonder why not.
Is Edwin best to comment on that? Edwin, can you comment on that, please?
Oh, I can do, yeah. So that's a current application that hasn't been determined. It's in the system, but it just hasn't been determined yet. It's not actually been dealt with by me. It's been dealt with by another colleague.
And what is that application? What does it say? What does it ask for?
I believe it's a scheme for free detached dwellings. So rather than a terrace, it's a scheme for free detached dwellings.
I see. Thank you.
Yes, Councillor Norton.
If the fate of the badgers is our overriding concern, then I think we have little choice. I think we have to turn this down. I'm not convinced by the arguments that the badgers will survive in this very restricted space. They're an animal that needs to roam. I think the argument that any building work on this site is going to probably destroy the set because it'll go on for months and months, heavy equipment, an awful lot of noise, which will be torment for the badger population. I'm impressed that the developers are prepared to protect residents from badgers coming into their gardens. I think that's important. But if the badger issue is the most important one, then I don't think we can say yes.
Okay. Yes, Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chair. I agree with both Councillor Norton and Councillor Clark. In the 8 years since this was first approved, we've come a long way, and we have declared a climate emergency in 2019, so we do have to take issues of biodiversity very seriously. These badgers have been on this site for at least 100 years, if not longer. When it was originally farmland, this is the only space they have left. There is good reason, I think, why the badgers haven't tunnelled down into the area where they're planning to move them to, because of the trees. There are quite a few trees there, including silver birches. The roots of these trees will prevent the tunnelling. So if they are moved there, and if an artificial set is made there, it will be difficult for the badgers, but damaging to the trees. And badgers, as we know, are adversely affected by noise, light, and vibration, which, you know, a building site cannot avoid. The reptiles I'm worried about, I was relieved to hear that they're planning to maybe look at Coombe Valley Park, because I think the children's play park they were originally looking at would have been, you know, bad news both for the reptiles and the children. The birds and the bats, I think, well, we've already lost the bats, I believe, because they've taken the roof off. And just turning briefly to the development, I agree it is a massive overdevelopment. I think to put 3 houses where there was one, and I think the narrow one in the middle just feels like the jam in a brick sandwich. I can't imagine anyone would want to live there. And there's heavy clay soil, there's the issue of drainage and water soaking. So in summary, I think we're at high risk of destroying not just the precious badger habitat, but the reptiles, birds, bats and trees. And I think it's an ecological disaster. So I cannot support it.
Yes, Councillor Curtis.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Gray just mentioned about the vibration. If I could ask members to have a look at 8.3.5, which there's a paragraph there that says what you can and can't do and should and shouldn't do and the laws and etc. It is that last bit that sort of struck me. Activities that can affect badgers include noise, additional lighting or vibration. But if they're just about to build 3 houses on it, that would probably take quite a period of time, I think it would seriously impact on the badgers. There was a couple of other points, but I'll come back to you on that if I may.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Proche.
Thank you. Councillor Charlie Clark is absolutely right. I don't think we would have given this permission in the first place. It's too cramped. It's ridiculous, three dwellings on that side. However, we are where we are. It's been given permission, so we can't actually fight that now. That's done. Whether an inspector would actually just say, yes, you can go ahead or not, I think we have to rely on Natural England, whether they would actually give the licence for this building. And we don't know until planning permission has been given. So again, we're between a rock and a hard place. This is a really interesting site. Now, I would like, Chairman, if you would actually at some point follow this up, because when we talk, we've got 2 policies already. We've got EN5, which is biodiversity and green space, and DEN4 in the DASA. Both of those talking about biodiversity.
Now, this site, we've concentrated on the badgers, and they've also done a reptiles survey. There's going to be a note to say, are there any nesting birds there? But that's a note. So there's very, very little on this application about biodiversity net gain. I can't see the gain here at all. And we have it within our power to actually say there should be some gain with the loss of biodiversity. And I know it's an accident of history that this has been a derelict site, but it's attracted an enormous amount of wildlife. And that's what it is now, although a lot of that has already been destroyed. So I'm at a loss, really. I don't think we can vote against it because they've had another ecological survey and mitigation for the badgers. The fact that we don't believe it's going to work, we're not the experts in that. So I'm not sure that we have a choice here, and hope that Natural England doesn't give the licence. I don't know.
I'm going to ask Edwin. I think Edwin's would like to speak. Edwin?
Yes, sorry. I was just going to say that in terms of sort of construction activities taking place, this will be one of the issues that Natural England considers in deciding whether or not to grant a licence for the works. So that is something that Natural England will consider. When a licence application, or if a licence application is submitted. In terms of biodiversity enhancement, we have got conditions on the permission which seek for enhancement measures to be provided on the site, particularly in relation to the 5 metre habitat area in the northern part of the site. So, yeah, there is an opportunity to provide biodiversity enhancement measures here, and we'd be seeking to secure those as part of the permission.
Councillor Curtis.
Thank you, Chairman. 8.3.11 clearly states at this stage, Natural England has advised there appears to be insufficient space at the site, advising that they are under the impression the development plans will need to be altered in order to practically accommodate the badgers in an artificial set on the site. So it's even that Natural England have said that they're not sure, they can't, there's no guarantees that what is suggested will work, but I just thought I'd bring your attention to that. PP. It's a very difficult one, as Councillor Projek has alluded to. It's very difficult, but I think something that did concern me was some of the comments earlier on. As this site's been sort of about for quite a while, if they didn't take any notice of an enforcement notice on it, what are they likely to carry on with? I know we can't sort of,
What's that?
Which was said earlier on. I think Councillor Clark mentioned it. But about clearing the site, there was no, they had plenty of time to do something about it, but I think it was just nothing was done. So whether that was correct or not. Thank you.
We can't find any detail of an enforcement notice. So anyway, I think your point's made anyway. Yeah. Yes, Councillor Madeley.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I have some clarification here? I assume that the previous application, which was passed, is now out of time. So why are we avoiding the actual application, apart from the badges, which is extremely important, but why is this being left off?
Edwin, would you like to?
Yeah, sorry, the previous planning permission was still extant at the time that this application was submitted, so it's still a live permission when this new application was submitted. When we received this application, we still had a permission in place for the previous development.
Thank you. Can I follow that up with another point? Thank you. Okay, so on that basis, despite all of that, we are talking about the life and love, if you like, of badgers, or even the hate of them, I don't know, but they are the most important part of the application, and therefore I have to say that it's overdevelopment of the site, and if anything's going to be built on there, it should be on the previous footprint. apart from the fact that it's out of character with surrounding properties. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Curtis, were you indicating Councillor Curtis again? Did you want to speak again? Wasn't sure. Okay. Yeah, Councillor Mear.
Chairman, I'm simply seeking absolute clarification of the point of whether or not we can revisit the existing planning permission. I agree with Councillor Projak that if that were before us today, I would suspect that we would turn that down as overdevelopment. Are we bound, as a matter of planning policy and law, are we bound to put that to one side in our deliberations today? That's the question.
Yes, I think it's a good point to bring Felicity Thomas in. Felicity, are you with us? And did you hear that question? We can repeat it if you like.
No, thank you. I did hear the question. I'm following along. I'm not entirely clear. I understood Edwin told us that the application was made before the expiry of the previous permission. Edwin, I'm not clear. Is this a Section 73 application to essentially extend the time for that permission, or is this a fresh application?
This is a fresh application.
In which case, all the usual planning material considerations are at large. It is not that we are bound by the previous permission, the decision on that, nor the conditions or anything else related to it. If it is a fresh application, it is brought to the council for fresh consideration of all the usual merits. So it does go beyond the issues of the badgers and the reptiles, although I think they still, obviously, looking at the report, they remain absolutely central. But the usual local plan considerations, the DASA, all of that is at play in the way it would be with any new application.
Councillor Mear, were you satisfied with that answer?
I found that answer very helpful indeed,
Chairman. Thank you for following that up, because if we are minded to refuse it, which I think the feeling around the table probably is, then we need to defer this on our recent training to actually get the reasons for actually refusing. Whichever suits you best or the officers best.
Just take a question from one of the Councillor Barnes.
It's from John.
Councillor John Barnes.
Chairman, I think we're in slightly dangerous territory. It's not so much, we'd have to have very good reasons for departing from what the previous committee decided. And I can't actually see anything that is contrary to policy in this. We are addressing the conditions, and they're pretty stringent around ecology and particularly the badgers. And that's quite right and proper. But I suspect we would lose this one on appeal.
A question for Felicity. I think there's a great quandary here, and I think firstly the committee does have to put the actual development aside in terms of number of houses, because there is a previous permission. I think at appeal that would not stand up. Would you feel that that's correct, Felicity?
It's right that the previous permission would certainly be a material consideration, obviously in the council's decision making, but it would also be included as a relevant consideration for an inspectorate appeal. So it's quite right that if the decision is to change, that would have to be very carefully articulated. Now, having said that, often during the lifetime of a permission, policies within the council may change, so that a new application may be met with a different policy matrix, and that altered policy matrix may lead to a refusal, whereas previously it might have led to permission. So, but I think Councillor Barnes is quite right that it is policy, or the current policy, that binds us, and we would need to be able to very carefully set out the policy reasons why the application was being refused. In other words, the council would have to set out its stall for why this was passed for permission previously, but now falls foul of the local plan. And that may be because of alterations in the policy in the meantime. Now, you guys are absolutely the experts on the policy background, and I am not. So I don't know to what extent your policy environment has changed or not changed since this application was last approved. So all I'm saying to you is it has to be according to policy. I think the difficulty here in relation to the badgers and the reptiles is that there appear to be extremely robust conditions that would ensure that development could not proceed until Natural England was happy to grant a licence and until the mitigation site had been found for the reptiles. So we would, I think if refusing the application in relation to the habitats issue, we would need to very carefully set out why the conditions were not felt to be adequate to essentially serve the habitats regulations as we need to. And obviously, I mean, it's finely balanced. There are obviously, we've had advice from Natural England that they don't view the alternative set as being sufficient. So on our best knowledge currently, they're really saying the whole application would have to be altered for us to grant the licence. But that's not really a reason for us to refuse. That would simply be a reason for the development not to be able to proceed if they can't meet Natural England's concerns.
Thank you.
I'm not sure if I've just muddied the waters rather than helping.
That was very useful. I think that addresses the quandary. Councillor Prochak.
Just to add to my initial point about biodiversity net gain, and the officer said, oh, well, it was all right. It's all right because they've got an area of scrubland at the bottom. That area of scrubland is already there. So that's not net gain. And so if we're reconsidering this application, let's make biodiversity net gain a feature of it.
Yeah, so this is a tricky application because I think we are all very sensitive to the issue of the wildlife. I think on the net gain, the issue is that it isn't policy yet, as you know, and so that's a struggle. And I think for a smaller application anyway, the 10% would not be applicable. And these are all the struggles that we've got, and I think you also have to consider what the sorry. For all applications, but a quantified 10% is only for large ones, I think. So you have to just demonstrate that. Okay, well, it's not, unfortunately, it's not policy yet. I mean, these are the struggles. We have to really consider the impact of refusal and the grounds of refusal, if and what that might lead to. Would this be successful at appeal? You know, they're all unknowns. The applicant has provided the ecological reports, which have satisfied the officers, and so that is a challenge in an appeal situation. I think Felicity has pointed out that this is not about whether it meets policy or not, because it does. It's a question of whether the applicant can satisfy the conditions after that application is given. In other words, the key one is the licence from Natural England, and they're already saying, well, the current plan doesn't. So they would have to come up with a different plan. I don't know if anyone wants to comment or have any thoughts. You know, as a committee, we are a bit in between a rock and a hard place on this one, I have to say. Councillor Mear.
Chairman, I'm wondering whether we should defer this until the next meeting. I'm thinking that this committee probably wouldn't grant permission on design and overdevelopment, what I briefly call overdevelopment grounds. But we haven't got enough of the policy in front of us. I don't have the data sitting in front of me to compare with previous policy to see if there are any opportunities there for us to revisit the decision on those grounds, which I think we would like to if we could. And I think perhaps it should go back to the officers to see if there are any grounds on which we could come to a different decision and stay within our own policies.
Did you want to speak?
I was just going to say the policies have been considered from the DASA. So.
Yeah, so Sarah's just saying the policies have been considered. I mean, you're welcome to put forward a proposal to defer to spend more time on that if you want to really understand, if there is somewhere to go. But I think the question is that it's policy compliant, and the issue is one of the conditions, and that on one hand, Natural England has to issue the licence. On the other hand, they're saying on the current plan they wouldn't issue the licence. So the question to you, Felicity, is could it be refused on the basis that Natural England has already indicated that the plan is not satisfactory, and we would want to see a plan that was satisfactory, that we knew that they could fulfil the conditions. What's the point of giving a permission when you know the condition can't be or is unlikely to be able to be fulfilled?
I'm thinking about the type of challenge we might meet, and I'm thinking about rationality. And my impression is we've got a report before us which tells us that the proposal is acceptable under the local plan and the policy matrix. There are two areas of uncertainty: the reptile habitat's location, the relocation site, and whether the developer will be granted a badger licence. Now, I don't think we could rationally refuse the whole application when we have set out very stringent conditions which make clear that if the alternative set is not acceptable to Natural England, they won't grant a licence, and the development won't be able to proceed. That is stated in the conditions. And similarly, it is stated that if there is not suitable alternative location site for the reptiles, that the development won't be able to proceed. So I'm not sure if it's rational for us. Is it reasonable then to refuse the application when we have set out a number of conditions that if the developer does not fulfil, they will not be able to develop? So I think the argument, either in front of an inspector or at the High Court, would be that the conditions were satisfactory and would protect the species adequately, which is something that Natural England also really tells us, that if there are suitable alternative habitats put in place, that it would be acceptable. It's just that they also go on, and I must admit, I haven't seen the advice from Natural England that says they think it's unlikely the current proposal would be acceptable. I don't know if that comes to us in a formal format or whether it's simply an aside that a Natural England officer has made to us in an email. Do you see? So I think the formality of that advice from them is material, because if we're refusing on the basis that it seems a foregone conclusion that no licence would be granted, then we just have to be certain of our basis for that. Having said that, in a lawyerly-like fashion, on the other side of the consideration, it is material to our decision as to whether we do find it likely that a licence would be granted. That is a material consideration that we can adopt. And if we simply think the licence application would never be granted, and we have indication from Natural England that it certainly wouldn't be granted on the current site, then that is, an important reason in the consideration whether to accept or refuse.
Right, let's ask Edwin how that advice was received. Edwin?
Hi, it was received by email from a Natural England officer who I think I set out in the report said that she thought there appears to be insufficient space at the site and commented that the development plans may need to be altered to accommodate the badgers. But then she goes on to say that she can't comment any further until a concrete licence application is received. So,
could we get a more formal response from Natural England? Is an email response sufficient for the city of that form that Edwin just commented on?
Yes, I mean, look, I think we could consider that formal advice. I don't think it has to be in any different format, so that we could consider the advice from them to currently be formal, and therefore our current information from Natural England is that a licence would not be granted, and I think we can take that into account in our decision making.
Yes, we just Sarah Shepherd.
Felicity, I mean, their comment is it appears to be insufficient space. They're not objecting per se. They're not saying a definite no. It appears to be insufficient. So is that sufficient for us to be able to say no?
So what do you agree with, Councillor McKenzie?
I agree that we cannot say definitely that Natural England would refuse a licence. We don't know. The fact is, we don't know.
I just want to ask a different question. Is that I thought there's also a policy where all our conditions had to be reasonable. And if we're giving an unreasonable condition that we think won't be agreed with, can we do that? I mean, I think there are a lot of questions here that we're not sure about. And I know we don't like deferring things, but we've recently had the training to say if we're in doubt, let's defer to get a bit more information. And I would propose deferring.
I'm going to ask Felicity a question. So, is in fact the condition unreasonable because there is a strong indication that it would not be able to be met?
No, I don't think that would make it unreasonable at all. I think, in fact, the wording of the condition simply, I think, carefully articulates the position of the council, which is that until there is suitable mitigation, no development should go ahead. And by imposing that condition on the permission, that's essentially the decision. Your application is granted only if you can suitably mitigate for the badgers and the reptiles. Now, I wonder if the council, if the Chamber's thinking of deferring this decision, there is a very helpful government note on making these kind of applications. It's just called Protected Species and Development Advice for Local Planning Authorities. And I wonder if members would find it helpful to review that guidance before making a final decision. Because these decisions are often very finely balanced. So this whole guidance note seeks to assist as to when you can grant and when you shouldn't grant.
That would be very useful, and I think if you could forward that to the officer, I think Councillor Project, you have put forward a proposal to defer to review that document, and we will do that. So there's a proposal to defer. Does anyone want to second that?
I'd like to second the proposal.
Councillor Madeley, all in favour of deferral, please raise your hand to defer that. That's unanimous, so that will be deferred. Thank you, Felicity. This is a complicated issue.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. And so on that basis, we're going to move on to the next application, which I think we're dealing with together, the next two. It's RR 2022/111/P, Keeper's Cottage. Oh, my apologies. My apologies. RR 2022/164P, which is 9 Coudensea Road. And can I thank everyone who came in to speak today. Really appreciate your time. Possibly. All right, let us continue, and we have Mark Simmons to present this application. That's 9 Coudensea Road, Bexhill.
Good morning, committee. My name is Mark Simmons, and I'm the case officer for this application. The site address is 9 Coudensea Road at Bexhill. It's a commercial property at ground floor in a parade of commercial uses with hot food takeaways and other commercial uses in the locality. Above the premises and above the adjoining premises are residential flats. Members did visit this site on Tuesday, so the planning committee should have seen the site and surrounds on Tuesday. The site is located on the junction of the A259, which is a trunk road, and Little Common roundabout. The site has a parking bay which is for the use of the public to the front that can accommodate approximately 5 cars. There isn't dedicated parking or servicing arrangements specifically for this property, but there is on-street parking bays, and the adjoining properties have a very similar arrangement. The main issues that have been raised through the representations that have come in have been amenity and highways, traffic, parking, etc. The environmental health officers have been consulted and they raise no objection. They recommend conditions about soundproofing, and we are putting forward a condition about hours of opening and hours of delivery. So officers feel there isn't an unacceptable amenity issue to any party. The other main issue that has been raised by a number of objectors in the representations is highways and parking arrangements. As I said, there's a public parking bay for 5 cars, approximately. Servicing and deliveries would be on street. However, neither the East Sussex County Council Highways officers nor the National Highways England body who have been consulted, neither raise any objection. The Highways officer has commented that the parking and servicing isn't ideal, but it's the same for all the commercial properties there, and the existing permitted use would have similar issues of parking. The agent has set out in the application and in a further briefing note, which I understand has been circulated to all members, that 75% of this particular chain's operations are deliveries. People phone in, place an order, and a delivery driver takes out the order. This is typically going to be in batches, so that will minimise people needing to visit the premises and traffic movements. They envisage 3 commercial deliveries to the store, to the premises per week. 2 would be food deliveries and 1 would be a drinks delivery, each delivery taking approximately 20 minutes, aimed to be outside of rush hour traffic, and so that would be down to the good operation of the store by the company. And again, the highways officers at a local level and at a national level do not raise an objection to this arrangement. The physical alterations to the premises are minimal. The front elevation would remain as it is with new signage, and there would be some very minor works to the side elevation, which would be an extraction grill and 2 condenser units, which would be, the condenser units would be at low level, as seen on the elevation plan there. They would not be seen from the public domain. The grill, I don't think would be seen from the public domain, possibly glimpses from upper floor of double-decker buses. So the visual impacts are absolutely minimal. So on that basis, with the lack of any objection from a statutory body and with conditions that we are recommending be imposed, officers' view is that the application can be supported and it's put forward, recommended for approval with conditions. Thank you, committee.
Thank you very much. And we have Katie Gregory, the agent, joining us remotely to support the application. Katie, can you hear us?
Hello, yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me and see me?
We can see you. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Start speaking whenever you like.
Good morning, Chair and Councillors. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today on this application for a change of use from a property advisory firm to a hot food takeaway unit, including external alterations. This application comes before you today following detailed and positive collaborative working with officers of the Council on the proposed development on which there are no objections from statutory consultees. We understand there are local concerns regarding the lack of parking and potential noise and litter issues, but it is our position that the unit will operate without giving rise to the concerns identified. In terms of concerns over local parking, Papa John's operate with approximately 75% of orders made online or by telephone and for delivery from the site. The remaining 25% of orders will be takeaway from the unit. Pizza delivery drivers employed by the operation will range between 2 and 8, with more being on shift at busy times. However, the drivers do not spend any significant time on site other than picking up the deliveries to take to customers. The unit will receive a total of 3 deliveries a week of food and drink, with the maximum delivery time being 20 minutes. It is also noted that these deliveries are made at times of the day, such as early morning, to avoid congestion and busy times. In-store staff members consist of between 3 to 6 employees, and as there is no on-site parking, employees will park in a location further from the store, where it is appropriate to do so. They may also travel by modes of transport other than the private car. The nearest parking for visitors is directly outside the front of the unit, with enough spaces for approximately 5 cars. As noted by the highways officers and as set out in the officer committee report, the unit will only generate similar or lesser numbers of vehicles than its current lawful use. There is no statutory objection from either the local highways authority nor National Highways. The proposed application is in accordance with the development plan and is set out in paragraph 111 of the National Planning Policy Framework, quote, "Development should only be prevented or refused on highways grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety or the residual cumulative impacts on the road network would be severe." The change of use application will not have a severe impact on the road network, confirmed by professional officers during the course of the application. We note there have been some resident concerns about potential impacts of noise and litter. The Council's Environmental Health Officer has no objection to the proposed change of use, and there will be conditions attached to any planning permission to control the operation of the unit, which specifically relate to noise and odour matters. We fully support the Officer's recommendations as set out in the report that the principal use is appropriate within the town centre. In addition to this, the change of use application would bring a vacant unit back into use and support the vitality of Little Common District Centre. Furthermore, as set out in the 6 letters of support, the change of use application will contribute to the vibrant mix of retail and professional units in the locality. We therefore request that members agree with your Officer's recommendation and grant planning permission for the proposed change of use. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for Katie Gregory? Yes, Councillor Langlands. Your microphone wasn't on during that. Sorry.
Sorry, Kate.
Katie, do you want to come back on screen?
Kate, sorry, I omitted to put on my microphone on, and you hadn't heard a word I've said. And
Start again.
I've been talking to myself. Kate, just quickly, have you ever considered the access to the right of the property, which seems to, I mean, when I went on the site visit, there seems to be rather a large space at the side that actually does combine with the fish and chip shop next door. Have you ever had discussions with them about possibly making that an access for your deliveries and working together on that one?
No, we haven't.
Oh, that's a shame.
Councillor Harbour.
Thank you very much, Katie, for your presentation. My question is, I've noticed that nationally you have different signage, which is quite refreshing, really. Would any consideration be given to signage being of a village feel if this application is agreed? Thank you.
So the external alterations would just be the standard sort of the colour in the RAL 9005 on the northwest elevations. So that would just be sort of the standard signage.
It seems though that nationally you do have different signs, or am I wrong? Is that international?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question?
When I've looked at your signage online, the signage does vary. Is that the international variation, or is nationally all the same style of signage?
I can't speak for other applications, but the signage should be standard across the nation.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Katie? No? You're welcome to stay online until the end of the application. Thank you very much, and we'll discuss the application. Could we have Councillor Drayson? Did you want to speak?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry if I confused you by giving my apologies. Unable to attend this morning's meeting, but at 5 to 10 I realised this was on the agenda, so I've cancelled my other meetings.
Are you attending as a member, a substitute member?
No, I am not attending this meeting as a substitute member. I am a ward member who actually called this application in. And I just want to go through the reasons why I did. And it's based entirely on the inadequate provision of parking in the vicinity. And even the officer has said, you know, there are already places parking there. Well, yes, this is just going to add to it. It's additional parking. And I'm not quite sure how they can say it's not going to be any more than a property development business was, you know, a food takeaway. But Their planning statement prepared by the Pegasus Group contains several comments in relation to the access to the premises, which, while factual, have little relevance to the outcomes which, from my own experience, are likely to occur. Despite the statement in para 2.4 that there is some on-street parking, and we've heard that's 5 spaces, including loading facilities restricted between 8 and 2 to 2 hours, I do not believe there's sufficient parking space available to allow suppliers to load and unload safely. Para 412 refers to 3 deliveries a week using a 10-ton delivery truck for 2 of them, and it says delivery vehicles will need to be present for 20 minutes. Those 5 spaces, that 10 truck will fill them, but even from the photograph on the application we saw there were no spaces left. That was full, and it's that way most of the day and most of the evening when residents can park there. The chance of the lorry ever parking outside are very slim. The delivery vehicle will almost, despite any conditions imposed or directions by the company, will almost certainly double park outside on the roundabout. With the best will in the world, a driver delivering several trolleys of supplies is not going to park half a mile away or more if these spaces are not available. Double parking on this roundabout, if only for approximately 20 minutes, will cause danger to other road users, especially pedestrians seeking to cross Coodensea Road using the Central Islands, or by reducing the visibility and available road space for vehicles using the roundabout. Given that most of the bus services referred to in para 2.5 of the planning statement use the roundabout, a restriction in road space is also likely to cause obstruction and delay to these services. Having addressed the deliveries, similar, I think, applies to the customers. 2.5 of the planning statement refers to bus routes which serve Little Common in general and include their ultimate destinations. And Coodon Beach Station is 1.5 kilometres away. I do not see the relevance of this paragraph. I'm not sure how many people, even from Bexhill, will catch a bus to Little Common, get a takeaway pizza, wait half an hour for a return bus, or in fact walk 1.5 kilometres up Coodensea Road, which doesn't have a footpath from the station, to again get their food and go back. It's stated that 75% of the food orders are delivered. Well, that doesn't cut down on the vehicles. There's still delivery vehicles going. 100% of a takeaway's food is taken away, and quite a percentage will be of cars. And even the presence of a Rother District Council car park within half a kilometre of the premises won't address it, because people simply don't park anywhere other than as close as they possibly can to where they want to go. Paragraph 521 of the planning statement makes reference, as did the lady from Pegasus, of the section 9 of the MPPF in relation to promoting sustainable transport. While I feel this is not relevant to the change of use, I will point out that para 111 states that development should only be prevented or refused on highways grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety. Obviously, they think there won't be. I think there will be. And even East Sussex Highways have concerns. Although they've said they're not overwhelming, they have the similar concerns. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Drayson. And Councillor Langlands, did you want to start the discussion, as you're also ward member? No? Did you not? No, you don't have to. Well, it's just the procedure, the process that I adopt. But if you don't want to, you don't have to.
I actually think Councillor Drayson has made his point. My point would be that it is an area where there has always been no parking for the commercial properties there. They've all struggled, and there's a lot of the fish and chip shops take away, the Indians take away, and they need to obviously have customers. Some stay quite some time. I think the parking issue is one that will be permanently a problem in Little Common. Tesco's, they all park on the pavement. It's not ideal. People refuse to use the parking that is available, the Rother parking, which they could well use, which is not too much of a stride away, but people seem to not use that at all. So the argument of parking doesn't sit well with me. I like to see the shop, the main shop on the roundabout, and it is a huge property in operation. And whilst I do have issues about the fact that we seem to be constantly having eateries everywhere, and it would be lovely to have, you know, what I call real shops, I would rather see this property being utilised than not. So that is my opinion.
Thank you very much. Would anyone like to comment? Any other comment? Councillor Projak.
Just quickly, that Little Common is like a village, as we know, and go to any of our villages and you'll have this parking issue of people of deliveries. And perhaps some of our villages would like to take away pizza places. The thing I wanted to mention, and I know I mustn't confuse my cabinet role with planning, but the litter, the big issue we have with litter is takeaways. And I know 75% are going to be deliveries to homes, which they should recycle. There's stuff there in their recycling. But is there any way we could have a campaign with takeaways such as this one to actually control the litter, at least to people to crush the boxes? We have a litter strategy, and so it would be good if that could be a condition, that some kind of signage is, perhaps it'll be a note, it could be a note to actually prevent litter.
Come to that in a sec. Councillor Errington.
Yeah, on that point as well, come back to what Councillor Projak had said, whether the company themselves could provide a litter bin outside and they ensure that it's taken away. I don't know how many people of Little Common will actually turn up and eat a pizza on the roundabout, but it'll have a novelty factor for initially, and it might bring out young people who otherwise wouldn't eat an Indian takeaway on the street, but they would eat a pizza. Getting back to the parking, yes, there is parking outside, but it's 8 till 6, it's 2 hours. I've thought about perhaps asking if we could reduce it to 30 minutes, but during the day is not when pizzas are eaten, it's the evening parking. So by 6 o'clock at night, most of that, as Councillor Drayson's already said, is taken up by residents parking, and they're gone in the morning or they take a chance. So, yes, I did see a big lorry last night park in that very space, and it was quite horrendous how it managed to manoeuvre into that. But that was probably, I don't know, 6:30, 7 o'clock at night, a delivery, it was outside of the delivery times anyway. My concern, having listened to what Councillor Drayson has said, and is where double parking will happen. It's a fact, and whether the bus then could get round the roundabout with a vehicle parked there. But again, it's only 3 times a week, and it might not coincide with the time of the buses. I wonder whether, this is something that we could perhaps limit the application for a time period, as we did. I know it's slightly different, very different, with the 1066 application at St Mary's, to see whether it is as bad and we do have the problems. Could we limit it? Thank you.
Are you suggesting limiting the period of the I think that might be a struggle with the commercial premises. I think, Councillor Madeley.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to compare this with another pizza business in Sea Road in Bexhill, and that's on a straight road. We don't have a roundabout with that, but I can assure you it's a dreadful problem when come early evening, when all the residents are back in the road. There's no parking available, very seldom there. We've also got a fish and chip shop takeaway. The youngsters who are delivering and so on, pizzas up there, turn up in their cars, park anywhere they can, and just abandon the car and go into the pizza shop and come out again. Okay, it's only for a short time, but that's going on all evening, and the pedestrian and the other drivers have to consider that extra problem during that time. Thank you.
Yes, before you just speak, Councillor Ganley, if I could just say, there's a lot of discussion about traffic and the issues, and there clearly are the issues with the traffic. We all know that, but it is an important reminder, and this came up during the training the other day on appeals, that if you refuse something against something where a statutory consultee had not objected, you're just likely to fail. Simple as that. So, as unpalatable as that is, it's an important statistic that was produced the other day. Councillor Ganley.
You said just what I was going to say. There you go.
Yes, Councillor Mayor.
Chairman, yes. Can I just ask what other activities would be permitted within the existing Class E usage?
Yeah. Class E now covers a very wide range of activities, including any sort of shop. I mean, you could have a mini Tesco Express or something go in there and they would not need planning permission. So there's lots of other uses you could have going in there that would have people stopping, deliveries all day long, potentially generating a lot more traffic than a takeaway that would be more active in the evening.
Thank you. That was the point I was likely to make.
Be careful what you wish for, I think, is something like that. Any other comments, or would somebody like to put forward? Yes, Councillor Ganley. Do we have a seconder for that? Second. We have a seconder for that. All those in favour of approval? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. I'm going to suggest we have a 15-minute break, if you're happy with that. So we're going to adjourn and come back at just before 11:15. Thank you. 26th of May, and the next application, there are two which we'll deal with together, which is RR 2022/111P, Keepers Cottage, Mountfield Lane, and the listed building version of that, RR 2022/112/L. And I will ask Sarah Shepherd.
Good morning, councillors. Right, the next item is Keepers Cottage. We have two applications, a planning and a listed building. The Keepers Cottage is located in a lane in Mountfield, and you visited the site on Tuesday. The listed cottage lies in the quiet rural countryside of the High Weald AONB, to the north side of the lane, close to All Saints Church, and the church is on the opposite side with the village hall where we parked. It is clearly visible within the street scene, and it sits on a hillside commanding open views out over the valley and the fields to its north side, to the rear of it. The proposal before you is for a 2-storey rear extension. That's the cottage there with the church and the hall, and the views open to the north. There. Now this is the cottage as it exists. You've got the front from the road there at the top, the rear elevation, and then either end. The proposal before you, as I say, is for a 2-storey rear extension, and it incorporates extension of the lean-to at the side. So you've got a 2-storey element and a single-storey element at the rear here. And it also includes the removal of the small rear porch that, as you saw on the photograph, and some internal alterations, which you can see. I'll just show you. You've got, as you recall visiting, you had some stairs that had been put in on the left-hand side here and a corridor created along the back. So the idea is to remove those and then create a link through into the 2-storey extension on the upper floor with new stairs within the extension. In considering both the planning and the listed building applications, the Council has a statutory duty to have special regard to the desirability of preserving the listed building or its setting or any features of special architecture or historic interest which it possesses. While it is noted that the Parish Council supports this application, the Council's expert advisor has provided clear information to clarify that the proposals are not considered to preserve the listed building and the features and historic interest that it possesses. While the existing stairs and creation of a corridor at first floor level, although of some age, may not be original, and with the exception of the western lean-to, the lobby entrance and original plan form of the cottage is relatively rare. The cottage retains, both externally and internally, a clear historic legibility that would be overwhelmed and distorted by the large two-storey extension and proposed changes in respect of the rear. The current layout of the two-bedroom cottage with 2 reception rooms, kitchen and bathroom could function as a family unit without further extension, and thus maintaining its historical significance and architectural interest. No evidence has been provided to justify why the property requires further extension or to detail any public benefits as detailed in the requirements under paragraphs 200 and 202 of the MPPF. The proposals are considered to represent harm to the listed building and in being out of keeping with the listed building, which is a typical feature of the High Weald AONB, it would also have a harmful impact on the landscape of the AONB. The recommendation for both applications is for refusal. If I just proceed down so that you can see the elevations there. You did see on Tuesday they'd outlined the footprint for the extension. So as I say, you've got the single-storey element, this section here that comes out, and then a 2-storey element next to it, which incorporates things like French doors, which are also not traditional for historic buildings.
Good. Thank you very much. Thank you. We have Councillor Peter Miles, who is here to represent the Parish Council. Peter, come forward and you have 5 minutes to speak, after which members may wish to ask you questions, and all you need to do is make sure that you press the button while you're speaking and turn it off when you're not. So thank you for coming today. Whenever you're ready.
Sorry, I'll sit back a little bit. This is me being my usual, very shy self. Is that more under control?
It may be also to do with your phone being nearby. Are you using that?
It's my stopwatch. It shoots me at 5 minutes on the dot. Okay, my name's Peter Miles, and I represent Matfield Parish Council and a number of other local parties. I should stress that I do not represent the applicants or their interests. My concern is entirely for Keeper's Cottage, which you met on Tuesday. You will recognise the technical hand of the Conservation Officer in the officer's report to members, and I'm very, very anxious that you do not assume that they are the only experts and that those are not the only views. They are not. There are other experts and other opinions, and I want to single out 2. First of all, Roger Howells is a Conservation Award-winning architect. He's worked in Rother for 40 years. He has special experience of historical buildings, particularly in rural Rother and Rye. Secondly, not represented in the officer's report to you, and not referred to in the officer's report, is that of Mr. David Tarr. David Tarr is a very distinguished building conservation consultant and historic building conservator, whose 66-page report is a formidable part of this application. Its omission from the officer's report is unfortunate. I would also add a little note here that in my personal view, this weight of experience, this weight of expertise, plus a dash of common sense, would carry the day should this ever go to appeal. The officers identify a number of issues such as bulk or scale, and their report states that the proposed extension increases the footprint by almost 50%, or as I would put it mathematically, actually 44%. And I think 44% is quite an achievement to accommodate features fit for the 20th century, never mind the 21st century. For example, a bathroom. There's no bath in that place. There's never been a bath in 4.5 centuries, apart from a tin one in front of the fire. A bathroom, a kitchen. All there was a galley area, still there, with a stove, a small fridge and a toilet. There's no food preparation area or surfaces. There's no freezer. There's no laundry facilities. There's no dryer. 44% looks pretty good to me. Another issue is the historic form. The report states, the officer's report states, although not unique, no, I live in one of a pair just a half mile along the lane as it happens, a lobby entrance house, and I'm happy to take questions on lobby entrance houses or wayside cottages. A lobby entrance house of this period, with its original plan, is considered to be relatively rare. So the conservation officer wants to preserve Keeper's Cottage for the nation in a metaphorical glass case as a museum piece, not conserve it as Keeper's Cottage for the real world. The report says that refurbishment may be acceptable, but the principle of an extension is not. That may be the officer's view. It is not supported by the other experts like David Tarr, not by Historic England, not by the village itself, and not by me. Nor is it supported by common sense. If you are going to invest heavily in extensive refurbishment, restoration and modernisation for whatever motive, whether it's profit or sale, which is not the case here, or income stream, and you've seen the order of the investment required, it's huge. You don't restore to a state of either non-viability, poor viability, or reduced viability.
You finish up now, Peter.
Yeah, you do the job properly, but sensitively. I could say a lot more, but the arguments already stack up so strongly and are so backed by real expertise that this application should succeed for the sake of Keeper's Cottage. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions for Peter Miles? Councillor Ganley.
Thank you, Chairman. Hello.
Good morning.
Good morning. You say that Historic England does not support the, or rather does support the application in essence. Is that correct? Because I can see no reference to Historic England in the officer's report.
There is a key document which the officers will be aware of, making changes to his heritage assets. Introduction, paragraph 3, the best way to conserve a building is to keep it in use.
Sorry, is this they didn't give specific advice on this building, though?
Not on this application.
No, I think that was the question that Councillor Ganley.
No, it is general standing advice. The idea that extensions are not supportable is not a general principle. It is one that applied by the officers in this instance.
More questions for Peter Miles? More questions? Yes, Councillor Projak.
Thank you, Peter, for your presentation. I'm Mankfield. I've got huge respect for Mankfield Parish Council and their concern with the environment and their buildings. But I just wondered, are there any other cottages in Mankfield Parish that's similar, that actually have extensions or don't have extensions? Do you know of any other?
It's an interesting question. There's two ways of looking at that. One is if you look at it as a lobby entrance building, strictly speaking, it may not even be a lobby entrance building because there is evidence that the central stack, lobby entrance building, very simply, is where you go in and there is a small lobby area between the front door and the central chimney stack, and then you can diverge into either parlour or other areas. There is evidence in the rafter work that actually it may not even be one of those. But central stack cottages and lobby entrance cottages are fairly rare. What it is a rather better example of is a wayside cottage. I
think the question from Councillor Project was, are there any other examples of extended listed cottages in Mountfield?
I think every cottage of this vintage in not just Mountfield but the surrounding villages is almost certainly a wayside cottage, and almost without exception they have all been extended. And I live in and own in one, and I own two myself, both of which are extended.
Any other questions? Yes, Councillor Gray.
Thank you. Thank you, Peter. Just out of interest, I wonder if you could tell us, if you know, when it was last inhabited and how long it's been empty.
Yes, the last incumbent, Gerald Collin, died in 2020, and he lived there. He was born and bred in that cottage, and his father was the keeper before him, Harvey Armour, as well, innkeeper's cottage.
So it's only been empty for, what, 2 years? Less than 2 years?
Yes.
Wow, thank you.
Okay. Did you have a question? Errington?
Thank you. I feel as if I'm missing something here. I'm a bit confused. We've got a planning application. We've got the parish council supporting it, but I don't actually understand why they're in favour of it being made larger, what the reason is, why they're not in favour of it being restored as it is as a 2-bedroom cottage. I'm not quite. There seems to be a third party, i.e. the person who owns it or the agent, who's actually missing. So can you fill us in with actually why you're not happy for it to be bought and restored in its current...
It's a very simple equation, and that is, if you're going to restore it, and you've seen it's going to take a lot of restoration investment. What you restore it to, my argument would be you restore it to the best of your ability, rather than to a state of reduced viability. The estate who own the cottage are going to be using it as an income stream. The better the income stream, the better that cottage will survive into the future. Do the best for the cottage, and you do the best for the heritage.
Sorry, again, I don't know if this is a planning thing. So as an income stream, it's either going to be a private let or a holiday let, something like that?
I understand it's going to be a private let.
And of course, 3 bedrooms would be viable, more viable than 2.
Of course.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Councillor Prochet.
So when we went in the cottage, it's extraordinary. Extraordinary. It's interesting because my sister lives in a very similar cottage in Herefordshire. They've just had an extension put on. And the problem they had was that the bedrooms, you go from one bedroom through to another bedroom, through to another bedroom. Now, I asked on site about this, and actually the conservation officers, the officers weren't particularly interested in what was happening inside. But I just wondered if you're going to change staircases, you're going to need an extension. That's my question?
I think that is probably true as it happens, but the idea of interconnecting rooms, particularly on a first floor and other floors, particularly with servants' quarters, is very common to all old buildings, and of course lots of old buildings are let for holiday lettings, and this is where it's a major problem. All the teenagers have to troop through Granny's bedroom every time. Yeah. But yes, generally speaking, they are pretty unamenable in that they tend to be arranged in that linear way.
I just think there's a little point here that I've got to draw attention to, and please don't take any disrespect, Peter. You're not presenting as an expert in this matter. You're presenting for the parish council, and I just have to be careful with members that you're not taking what Peter says as necessarily technically, professionally correct. You know, he's presenting for the parish council, so just please, please don't take that the wrong way, but we have to be very careful about that. Yeah, good. Councillor Barnes, you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Over the last 12 months or so, as my daughter is preparing to do up a very old house in Robertsbridge, we have got to know David Martin very well. And David Martin is probably one of the most foremost experts on timber frame buildings in the southeast, if not the whole country. And although I haven't asked him his opinion about Keeper's Cottage, I can relate that he actually is in favour of making a house fit for the 21st century. So that if you are living in a house and you want to make it a home, then you should be allowed to do some minor, in this case, I don't agree with Sarah. I think it is a fairly, it is a very contained extension.
Mary, do you have a question for Peter Miles? This is the session we're having. Do you have a specific question for Peter Miles, or do you want to wait?
Yes, I do. My specific question is: can we assume that if this is allowed, that there will be no damage done to the existing beams?
Mary, I'm going to stop you there. That is not a question for Peter Miles. He is presenting for the parish council. He's not presenting.
But he's already told us that he's talked to various conservation people, and I would have thought that would have come up.
That may well be the case, but those conservation people aren't here presenting. That's sort of hearsay. The reports that they've done have gone to the officer and have been considered there. This is a session to ask questions specifically about what Peter has raised, and you can talk.
You're
about
quite right. I'm so sorry. I've actually premeditated the rest of the.
Well, you can ask those questions when we come to.
Thank
the
you.
session.
I will be coming back on that one after in the open session.
Right, that's good. That's all right. Thank you. Sorry.
Hang on, John.
Chairman, can I ask a question?
Of Peter Miles, yes.
Peter, I'd like you to say a little more about the record of this particular architect doing conversions of historic buildings. You referred to his good reputation. Could you spread that out a bit more, please?
Yes, I can. And in fact, I'd just like to pick up on what Mary, Councillor Barnes, said there about David Martin. David Martin was invited to act on this. He is retired now in Bexhill. He decided not to come out of retirement. What they did do, the owners, is they got David Tarr out of retirement as the second best there is. In terms of expertise, just by the way, the leading historical research on this part of the AONB, which includes the built environment, is actually by, with all due modesty, yours truly. But Roger, he got the Sussex Heritage Award, Conservation Award, for his work only a couple of years ago, before lockdown, for his work on Norman House at the top of Mermaid Street in Rye. And he has always been the sort of main go-to architect in Rye, which, as you know, is a major conservation area. He's also done work in Robertsbridge and in Battle as well. And 40 years experience in particular of rural Rother.
Yeah. So all his work is being considered by both the conservation officer and the officer who did the report. So we appreciate that. Thank you, Peter. More questions, Peter? Peter, thank you very much for coming along.
Thank you.
If you could push the little button on the
yes.
speaker, I appreciate that. Thank you very, very much for that. We appreciate that. We know we're all very aware of your passion for particularly for the AONB, and so it's nice to see you back in person. So, open discussions. Councillor Kirby Green, who called this in, can't be here today. Not sure why, but she can't. Councillor Barnes, as a joint ward member, would you like to start the discussion?
Yes, Chairman. I cannot see the objection to this in terms of scale. You are bringing a 2-bedroom cottage up to a 3-bedroom cottage. You're providing the kind of modern kitchen that you would provide. I can't see that Roger Howes would do any damage to the existing building because he is an extraordinarily reputable architect and one who has great respect for timber frame buildings. So I can't help feeling, and I'm not quite sure why, and perhaps Sarah can explain this, that we are getting very perfectionist about a building which, although it's relatively rare, is not exactly uncommon in the High Weald area. It's not an outstanding one of beauty. I also find it quite difficult to believe that it has that much impact on the landscape. It will alter the rear aspect of the property, but in a way that a great many other properties have already been altered over the years. This one chanced not to have been altered at all, remained a 2-bedroom cottage, but really, where it is, it's going to do, I think, extraordinary little damage. And we really ought to take the views of the parish council extremely seriously because they know their area, they know their village, they know what will damage the AONB. And believe you me, Mountfield are one of the more sensitive parish councils to these considerations. They're not likely to have taken their decision lightly. Normally, I would expect them to be to objecting rather than to actually supporting an extension. So I think we ought to put full weight on what the parish council has to say.
Thank you, John. Before going on, before asking for further comment, I think it is important. I think there are two things to point out. One, and I'm sensitive to parish council comments because I'm obviously the chairman of one. But we have to be very careful. This is a listed building conservation issue, and parish councils aren't listed building conservation experts, and so that is the issue here. And I'm going to ask the conservation officer before we go into discussion to explain why he feels that the position taken is the one that they have taken. I think that's really important so that we understand their point of view. Could I ask you, Simon, who's waited patiently through the meeting today? There you go.
Thank you, Chair. Okay. With regard to Keeper's Cottage, as discussed in the report, the lobby entrance 2-bay dwelling is relatively rare. It's already been spoken about that actually we believe that it's one of the very few now remaining that haven't been extended or altered in the area. And for that primary reason, I would seek, in line with the National Planning Policy Framework, to ensure that great weight is given to the significance of conserving the heritage asset. With regard to that, the further extension and increase of scale of the building, the loss of its original plan form, which was 2 bays either side of a central chimney stack, would diminish its aesthetic quality. Not to mention, actually, we're going to need to get to that extension, so we're going to need to put holes in walls. So original timber frame members, particularly at the first floor level, would be lost. Now, in line with the National Planning Policy Framework, we can consider less than substantial harm and it to be mitigated by either clear and convincing justification or public benefit. So if there is something that is quite clearly presented to the council and presented to me as the conservation officer, I can take that into account. or that there is significant public benefit, so there would be a gain in housing numbers. So that's why, for another example, we would talk about conversions of a large property into several flats. There could be a public benefit there. Based upon the information that was provided to me, I did not believe that there was clear and convincing justification that this property was not viable as a two-bedroom cottage. And following on from that, looking at the public benefit and public interest, the provision of housing as a two-bedroom cottage could still be achievable in its current format. Internal alterations that would enable the property to be of greater amenity obviously weren't proposed in this particular application, because this application was for a three-bedroom property. So on the basis of the National Planning Policy Framework and Section 16 of the Planning Listed Buildings and Conservation Area Act, which gives us a statutory duty to having special regard for the desirability of preserving a listed building, its setting and its features, based on the information before me, I recommended that the application should be refused, because ultimately there is no justification laid before me for doing so.
Thank you for that, Simon. Could I have questions, please? Commentary. Yes, Councillor Norton.
Thank you very much, Simon. As a historian, I was really thrilled to go to Keeper's Cottage. It is a rare survival, and therefore a very precious survival. You know, an almost intact cottage, farmhouse, going back to the 17th century is extremely rare, whatever else has been said here this morning in this area. And I think we need to treat it with kid gloves. And I'm very unhappy about the suggestion. I think this quite sizable extension on the back will be visible from a considerable distance. Keeper's Cottage is on a prominent hill. It'll be seen from a long way away, the opposite direction from the church. I agree with Simon that I think it's perfectly possible to convert it to a small family. It hasn't got a bathroom, that's been mentioned. Lots of modern accommodation doesn't have a bathroom. Many people never use a bathroom today, as long as they've got a shower. I'm concerned also about the yew tree, which is very, very close to the existing building, that it's an ancient yew with an enormous girth. I don't know how many of you noticed it, but I think it's going to be very difficult to do this kind of major conversion without damaging that precious tree. There's also a marvellous oriental plane in the garden, and also a walnut tree. I think this is a very special site, and a very special building, and I think we should be very careful when we tamper with it.
Councillor Curtis.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on from those points, I wondered if perhaps the cost of any rebuild in its current state would deter any further sort of improvement, because it needs to be brought up to date. It is an existing building in the AONB. Unfortunately, the ravages of time have led to the deterioration of the property, and as I see it, we now have the opportunity to do something about it, whether it is to conserve it for the future, together with any upgrades or bringing it into the 21st century, which would make it suitable for future habitation. I think we all looked at it. Whichever way you look at it, it's derelict. It's no good to man or beast at the moment. If we don't do anything, it'll probably fall down and be lost to whatever. We have an opportunity perhaps to do it sympathetically with something that is already there. So maybe we can look at that. Thank you.
Councillor Curtis, just taking up that point, I'd like to ask the Conservation Officer exactly what happens with the listed building if the owner allows it to go into disrepair. Can you just remind us, because I don't think it's something that's covered often in our training.
As far as certainly external appearance, Section 215 notices for the improvement of the external appearance can be applied by the council, and usually if a building is falling into disrepair, there is various points of legislation where emergency works can be carried out, which have to be the minimum necessary, and then they would provide an application to the council for approval. I just need to refer to my colleague just a moment. And finally, we can impose a listed buildings repairs notice if necessary. And as probably a last point that we would go to, we could look at compulsory purchase.
Thank you for that. Yes. Councillor Errington.
Sorry to get back to this, it isn't a planning thing, I just need to get it straight in my head. This is actually owned at the moment by the estate. Yeah? Up to 2 years ago, somebody was actually living in there, so presumably it hasn't been maintained by the estate for whatever reason. So it isn't a case of it being sold, it's whether they want to spend X thousand to make it a 3-bedroom or less than X thousand and it's a 2-bedroom, but the more they invest, the more they're going to get back on their investment, thank you, in terms of rental. And I know that's not a planning issue, but that seems to be what the argument is. But we must look at it from a planning issue, because I can see hundreds of people coming to us in the future, and I'm really concerned that we're going to make a decision today that we're going to be pulled up on in future. So can we just make sure what we're deciding on and what we're taking into consideration?
It's very much much about the proposed extension to a listed building and the impact on that listed building. And the officer's point of view is that it is a very special building that can be made, it can be restored, be made habitable, and is quite satisfactory as a 2-bedroom. I think if I've summarised you properly, tell me. I'm just summarising what's been said.
On the point of the building's condition and that being a planning matter or not, paragraph 196 details that where there is evidence of deliberate neglect or damage to a heritage asset, the deteriorated state of the heritage asset should not be taken into account in any decision. Whether the perception of deliberate neglect is a matter for us to consider now, is for the council to consider. Is non-maintenance, not having a maintenance regime over many decades, is that deliberate neglect? That's a question that you as individuals can only answer.
Yes, Councillor Madeley.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Chairman. I appreciate that it didn't reach us, but do we know by any chance, possibly through Sarah, why the application back in 2021 was withdrawn, which was the demolition of an existing porch, internal alterations?
The previous application was basically the same. From my understanding, they were advised that it was likely to be recommended for refusal, and they decided to withdraw the application.
Yes, Councillor Langlands.
Thank you. I've spent some time reading the heritage statement, which I've actually found by David Tarr, and I've actually found that very, very helpful in helping me to formulate an idea about this place, because it isn't as special an example as I think that the officer has made out it to be, as I see it. Doors have been closed off, windows have been moved, it had a thatched roof and it doesn't have one now, so it isn't what it was originally, albeit it is still a very old building. And another thing I really want to draw to attention, I also went and explored French doors, and they're 17th century. So I think we can't use that as an argument for saying this extension can't have French doors, and because they were used in this country in the 17th century. So I think the way the French doors look matters, but I don't think it's an argument. So I'm looking at it. It was, as Councillor Curtis pointed out, pretty derelict. And inside, unfortunately, and I think this is so significant, if you're looking at an old building, it's such a shame to walk inside. The outside, yes, it's like, don't judge a book by its cover, because the inside was just sadly in a really derelict state. Things have been done over periods of time that actually have been quite detrimental to the value of the building. The use of materials, softwood floorboards, it just needs something to happen to it. And I was quite impressed by the design, the discreetness of the design, the use of the materials. And I've got to say, I think, I live in a little old cottage, I cannot see a way of making a good kitchen and bathroom area without taking another bedroom away and making it a single bedroom cottage to try and bring it anywhere into the 20th century. So I would say that this is an excellent step towards doing something up, retaining it and keeping it as an asset in the village.
Yeah, just before you speak, Councillor Prochak, I think I'd like the Conservation Officer to respond to the comments about the report produced by, what was his name? David? Yeah. Because well, it's a report. I think be really careful. It's a report done by somebody who wasn't employed by the applicant. It's obviously done a report and sent it in as a non-statutory consultee. Okay. So anyway, I'm asking the Conservation Officer to comment on that, because he's the one that we employ to give advice and to reflect on things provided to the application. So could you do that?
The details provided by Mr. Tarr were indeed very interesting and did contribute towards me evaluating the case and providing my recommendations to the case officer. But it didn't get me past the point of why do we need to do this. I, with respect, Councillor, not in agreement with you that a bathroom and decent living facilities could be provided within this modest cottage. By the time you start putting on a extension at 2-storey level, projecting out from the building, you lose the plan form of the building. We start losing historic material. A 2-bedroom cottage turns into a 3-bedroom house. And it's those reasons that I believe to create harm to the listed building. And then it goes back to this point as detailed in the National Planning Policy Framework. Is there clear and convincing justification for doing this? Or is there public interest for doing this? And that is, as interesting as the report was and very informative, that did not outweigh the great weight that should be afforded to a heritage asset.
So they are the tests against which we must judge this. And that's the important thing. Councillor Prochak.
Thank you, Chairman. Just to say that David Martin is the expert on listed buildings. Extraordinary work he's done, and he's recognised nationally. Also, I know Roger Howell's work because he's worked in Robertsbridge, and in fact, he did an extension on one of the oldest buildings in the High Street. This is some time ago, linking it to a modern school, and he found a way of linking the old and the new. It's excellent work. I can certainly agree with that. I agree also with what Councillor Norton is saying, is that it is an amazing building. If you'd known the character who lived there before, you'd know why it is like it is. Quite a character. And I can imagine he didn't change much there. The report recognises in paragraph 7.10 it recognises that restoration of a property, it should create a viable living space. And for me, this was the issue in terms of this property. What would you need to do to create a viable living space? A viable living space 100 years ago is not what we want today. And when I think of the listed buildings that we have, the Delaware, Grade 1 starred listed building, we allow changes to make it viable. And we've got other plans as well to make changes there, and the Conservation Officer will be involved in that. So we allow changes. I've got one in Robertsbridge, which our Conservation Officer knows about, which is a huge listed building right in the middle of the village, has been allowed to deteriorate, bits falling off, dreadful state, and it's been closed way, way before the pandemic. And now it's in a state that it's not viable. It's empty. It's not viable as a pub. And this is so sad when really what's needed is actually a little bit of leeway to actually allow a building to survive. My guess is that if this building is not, and I think the extension is sympathetic, and it's got to be done to create the modern living space that we expect. I think it will just become derelict. And yes, there are ways of doing it, but we've got a building in the centre of Robertsbridge that's been empty now for 7+ years, and we haven't been able to do anything about it. So our powers are limited in terms of what we can do if a building's derelict. Conservation Officer goes on about public benefit. And I think the public benefit here is to actually save a listed building so that somebody can live there and look after it. And it's only in living in a building that you get actually it looked after. I think the whole thing about viability is important. I mean, when we went in, and I know the officers have said, well, we're not looking at the inside particularly, but once you walk in the inside, and I had a conversation with Councillor Stevens about the cost of doing up something like that, even to make it 2-bedroom, it's not viable, the cost of doing that. So I would actually vote in favour of this if it came to the crunch.
I'm going to make a comment at this point. I usually don't make a comment during the discussion, but I'm going to. And like some of us, we live in the high weald. I think this is a little gem. I think this is simply a little gem. And I think the owners bought it. And when you buy a listed building, you buy it with the knowledge that you're going to have to spend money one way or the other over time. And if you buy it in that state, and I think the owners who had it in that state and left it in that state should look to themselves. I think you have a when you buy a listed building, you buy a responsibility, and you're keeping that building for the future. And when you do an extension, if you change it manifestly, and a 44% increase on a small place is a large increase, and that extension on the back changes the whole visage of it. It changes the whole way it looks. And so be it. If it's converted to a 1-bedroom house with a modern bathroom and kitchen, that's the way it is. Maybe you don't do anything to the outside and you put an annex down where that little shed was. You can have a sort of annex bedroom or whatever if you desperately need another bedroom. There are other ways to do things. Just because it doesn't mean that if they're talking about viability, I don't think viability is relevant in the slightest. They bought it as it is, they own it, they knew that there was a cost to restoring it, and if they didn't have that money, they shouldn't have bought it. Not to try and somehow hijack a planning committee and say, if you don't, then this will all fall down. They have a responsibility to keep it up. And you looked at that. If you looked at that from across the valley, you would see a very small building. If you looked across the valley from with an extension, you'd see a beautiful building with a modern extension, even though you had tried to use materials which would bring it in. It would look completely different to what it looks like. You know, the lack of windows on that side. I take your point about French doors, but the fact is, French doors don't exist in high-wheel buildings. They don't. That's not a characteristic of a high-wheel building. This is an opportunity to save something which is quite unique, and I don't think it's good enough to say it's not viable, because you buy it with the knowledge and responsibility of having to know you've got enough money in the bank to fix it up. And actually, I think the current occupants have left it to get a little bit shabbier. I mean, just not doing the garden, not mowing it properly. The best they could do is mow a little path in so we could walk in. It's made to look shabby. If you just took out the rubbish from around it, it would look, it would just look like a building that needed a bit of work done. So I can't agree with those points of view, and I think this is a little gem that needs to be, that the owners have a responsibility of saving, and if it turns it into a one-bedroom because they want a big kitchen and bathroom as opposed to just a shower room or something, then that's my feeling on it. I think it's an opportunity to save it, and I don't think the points that have been raised are relevant in this case in terms of modernising and so forth, and this is the only option, because I don't think it is. Anyway, that's my view. Any other thoughts or comments for this? Yeah.
Well, I've got to say, I'm so torn with this one. I live in Rye, and obviously I believe in heritage and everything. I've really got to think hard. Thank you.
Short and sweet. Any other comments? Councillor Ganley.
I have to say, I fully agree with what you said, Chairman. Just one point, they didn't actually buy it. They've sort of inherited, well, they've had it for some time, but that's irrelevant, really. My other impression, I only looked at the ground floor, I didn't go upstairs. And I'm not a qualified builder, although I did property development for a few years. It strikes me that the cost of renovating the interior would not be excessive. I think there's a lot of, it looks terrible, but a bit of plaster and paint would make a huge difference to it, and that's not excessive. Well, in today's world, everything's expensive, but that is, relatively speaking, not so expensive.
Thank you. Any other thoughts or comments? Does somebody want to propose anything? Sorry? No, you don't. Does somebody want to propose?
Are we proposing rejection or acceptance?
Well, you're doing the proposing. The officers. So you're proposing supporting the officer's recommendations, which is refusal. Is there a seconder for that? There's a seconder with Councillor Ganley. So all those in favour of supporting the officer's recommendation, which is refusal, please show their hand. That's 8 for. Those against? That's 3 against, and I don't think there are any abstaining, was there? So the officer's recommendation is taken on that one. Thank you very much. So let's move on to the...
At this point, I'm going to make...
Yeah, thank you very much, and sorry to have kept you late for your previous appointment.
I'm going to say 7 stars now.
Don't be mean to him, you won't say the 7 stars.
Thank you.
So the next application is a Rother application, or an application on Rother land, which is RR 2022/795/P, and that's Kingsmead, Calbeck Hill, Battle. This is the brazier. You doing this, Sarah?
Mm-hmm.
Good.
Right, yes, this application is reported purely because Rother District Council own the land. The application is from Battle Town Council, proposing to erect one of the braziers which, sorry, I'll just get through so you can see the drawing. A lot of you will be familiar with these. They're on various other parish council-owned land, particularly around the district. They've been used for other events in the past. The Queen's Jubilee obviously set out a lot of these in the past. Now we've got a Platinum Jubilee, which is what Battle would like to put one up for. You visited the site on Tuesday, the Kingsmill Recreation Ground. The position for the brazier is to the rear of properties that are, the access is off Calderbeck Hill, goes in private access to serve a handful of dwellings here. The listed windmill, which you all looked at, to the north of the site there. The brazier is to be roughly 15 metres into the site, away from the neighbouring gardens, roughly in line with the boundary that splits between two rear gardens. There's been no objections to it, and the recommendation is for support.
Yes.
Could I move approval? I think there used to be a beacon there anyway, years ago. So move approval.
A second. Sorry about that. Does anyone want to speak on this? The proposal is for approval. Those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you very much. And that takes us on. That takes us past the applications themselves. And the next item is the planning statistics for the quarter. Does anyone want to make any comment on the planning statistics? Any comments? Any thoughts? While you're waiting to think about that, I have asked Ben Hook, the Director of Place and Climate Change, for a report to come to Cabinet in July to explain what he proposes in terms of, and what is planned, because we have a development manager who is an interim. Yeah. Excuse me, in the public gallery. Excuse me, hello, those at the back. Do you mind not speaking, because it's sort of interrupting this there? Yes, so I have asked for the Director of Place and Climate Change to bring forward a report to put forward his recommendations for what he plans going forward in terms of continuing to drive down our applications on hand, because they were driving down very well until the beginning of the year, and unfortunately we've had an increase in applications, so that the net effect of that is that we haven't been able to drive them down, but they've just been held more or less stable at around 500 or so, 510, and they're still doing a great job, but unfortunately we've had this increase in applications, which is negated partly the effect of the good job they're doing. So we need a plan, and also to understand the plan to bring a permanent development manager to the authority as well. So I've asked for that, just to let you know that. Any other questions? I mean, I think the statistics are still improving, and you can see enforcements, for example, are where have we got enforcements on hand? Are down to 261, which is the lowest level they've been since the first quarter of 1920, and compared to the middle of last year. Sorry, 1920. No. So they're lower than the first quarter of 2019/2020. To be clear, sorry, probably 1920 as well. So they're actually about a third lower, which is very good, and about half of the high point when we got a lot during the pandemic. So that's excellent. The enforcement are getting on top of that workload, and I think a lot of that's down to processes that Miles has introduced, and you can see the applications in the last few quarters have really risen, which hasn't helped us, but the applications determined are significantly up. I mean, in the last 6 months, we've determined 300 applications, and that compares to 200 or 220 or so in the previous 6 months. So, it's all moving in the right direction, really. Any comments? Yeah. Councillor Ganley, did you have a comment you want to make?
Last week I got thoroughly hammered by Ewhurst Parish Council for the so-called lack of enforcement, in particular about one site, Damson Field, which I then went to visit with, again, I knew the site, with my fellow councillor Martin Mooney. It's been tidied up, and so it's difficult. Obviously, we are doing quite a pretty good job with enforcement. It is actually reducing the number of issues, the number of complaints is dropping. But it seems to me that Parish Council don't realise that is the case. Perhaps we need a bit more information given to Parish Council on that subject.
Yeah, I agree with that. You could send out some sort of summary of statistics.
I think so, yeah. And yesterday there was let me finish. There was an email again which was thrown at me from Ewhurst Parish Council saying this is rubbish. It was a list of enforcement notices issued in each parish over the last, I don't know how many years. It was a very simple document. I didn't receive it. They received it, but I didn't receive it. I had to point out to them that it was not, they complained that none of their remarks had been taken into account or entered onto that document. Well, I had to point out to them that the document obviously wouldn't include them. It only included a list of enforcement notices issued. However, I'm surprised I didn't receive it when the Parish Council received it.
I don't even know what it was.
It was very...
It may be that just during the beginning of May, the all enforcement notices going back to 2013 are now online.
Right.
And maybe they picked it up from that and created their own summary. Because I don't think anything's been sent out by anyone, to my knowledge. I haven't heard of anything. I've not received anything.
I'll forward it to you and to Sarah.
Yeah. Do you have any?
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, obviously they're working on the online website information for enforcement. And I know there's a couple more bits that they're finalising at the moment, and then people will be able to go on and track what's happening with an enforcement complaint in the same way as you can track a planning application.
Excellent.
So that is all in the background and that is being done. There's just a couple of little bits of IT stuff that they're just finalising, but then the parish will easily be able to log on and look at any enforcement complaint they've logged and see where it's at, whether it's been site visited, whether a letter's gone out, whether an application's been requested, or whether actually, as a lot of them are, they're not actually, quite often they are very minor issues that we can't actually take enforcement at, or nothing that enforcement can do anyway because it's somebody else's legislation or responsibility. But that is all coming online and that should be available shortly.
Any idea when?
I've been told imminently.
I think they're trying to get all the other notices up online, the breach of condition notices and statutory notices, like in the same format as the enforcement, but it's a major change in a fairly short period of time. I mean, the statutory notices most of those should have been available in an easy format for some time.
Yes.
And so I think it's a pretty big achievement to get them there.
Indeed.
But we're also desperate to get them up. That every day seems like a long time. Yeah. Yes, Councillor Harmer.
I just wanted to say a big thank you again. I'm sure Councillor Errington will agree with me. We've both received a superb service as councillors from all in planning department, particularly Miles, within 10 minutes in some instances. So thank you very much indeed. Just one question: have we got an update on a replacement tree officer? Thank you.
That's Brian Griffiths.
No, we did go out to advertise. We didn't have any applicants for that. We're currently still using an internal officer from another department who we have one day a week, and we do have an external consultant working for us looking at new TPO requests.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more? No? Okay, item 13 is undetermined applications, and you can see the major applications there. I know from my own experience of a couple of applications that I've been asked about that Section 106 seems to be taking an enormous amount of time, and that's the Wealden Legal Department. I think that we're having, there's got a big backlog. I don't know if you want to make a comment.
Yes, there is a big backlog of work. As you know, it is a shared service. The new solicitor that started is actually leaving us again, so there'll be an issue there. We do use a firm of, I know the Wealden managers for legal do actually use a firm of external solicitors, and hence Felicity that's kindly attending today for us. So that is a matter that's being discussed at that level.
So, Councillor Proshak.
Thank you. A couple of questions. One is I wondered why the mill site in Robertsbridge wasn't on this list, unless I've just missed it. And the second question is on the first page, Bexhill Leisure Centre, a planning application for a leisure centre.
I don't know, you mean the new application for Robertsbridge Mill that we haven't got yet, or the old one that's been determined?
Both.
Right, well, if it's been determined, then it wouldn't be on the list because these are ones that are currently undetermined, and we haven't got the new application yet, so that won't be on the list until that's been submitted. In terms of the Bexhill Leisure Centre, yes, that is an old application which you may recall from a couple of years ago. There are still there's still disagreement about the land swap situation with county, and that's what's held up the 106 agreement.
I think the point is that it is an application which has been approved, which is disconnected from any strategic plan about leisure centre. I think that's the underlying question there. Yeah. Any other questions on the major applications? Move on to appeals. Any questions on appeals? Of course, as we clear the backlog of applications, it automatically generates an increase in appeals as well. The current rate of success of appeals is about 80%, I think. So only about 20% of appeals are being upheld. Any questions? No? It is a pity about Stranraer, but what can you say, really? You read the report? Any questions? No questions? Well, if there are no questions, then the only last item is just to confirm the 21st of June for the next site meetings. And thank you very much for a good meeting this morning. And thank you very much, Felicity, for attending and helping us. So we very much appreciate your advice during these meetings. Thank you very much. Having to sort of wait for suddenly your name to be called. So thank you. All right, on that basis, I think we'll finish the planning meeting today at 12:25.